This is the portion we'll have a conversation, and if you're hearing things or not hearing things that you'd like to have the president answered, please write them down on index cards on your table and hold them up, and we will come around and collect them. We'll try and get to as many as we can and integrate it into the questions that we're presenting now. But if your question doesn't get answered, I apologize in advance. But Mr. President, thank you very, very, very much. Listening to you, I guess the first burning question I had is, what instrument did you play?
I was a guitarist. I was a guitarist. I played since I was 10.
Is that right?
I'm 10 years old. And yeah,
do you still play to relax?
I still play. Not as much. I used to play 3-4 hours a day. Now, if I get 20 minutes a day, that would be a lot.
At midnight, maybe.
Yeah, or very early in the morning. I wake up at 4:30ish.
Great.
So
I wanted to go back to something you talked about, the declaring war. Those were your words. And you had a very important decision to make very early on, as I referenced in mine, and you certainly talked about more. Within a few weeks, there was that explosive report that came from the Attorney General talking about the ties, the corruption between judiciary, politics, and narcotraficantes. You could have said, okay, well, that's a legal issue and I'm not going to get involved with it. Or you could have said, this has come to me now. This is a defining moment early on and I need to embrace it. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to realize that that was something that you needed to embrace and take forward?
Well, I needed to change what stopped people like you sitting here from going to Ecuador and investing and creating jobs and creating progress. And what was that? It wasn't only the physical security, but also for businesses. And we can't move forward if we don't change completely, or we don't eliminate the corruption in the judicial system, in the regulation agencies, and also in the legislative branch, as well as in some parts of the executive. Like, we had to clean every single area. And also, a lot of people think that the fiscal or the DA is completely separate. She doesn't have the resources. Actually, the resources come from the executive. All the raids, everything comes from the national police. All the technology comes also from the executive branch, comes from the WAFE, comes from the IRS, comes from the CS, which is our intelligence agency. And I had to support her. She's not an easy woman. She has her days, but we respect each other. And I gave her my full support. I said it's now or never. If I was crazy enough to change the whole top of the military and the police, I said, well, if we're already in this, we need to do a deep cleanse. Last night and this morning, we saw the second stage of it, which is the Operation Purga, where we're cleaning the judges in the criminal courts in some of the countries, the ones that actually let the criminals go or set them free. So 13 judges and ex-officials this morning. I was this morning 2 to 3 a.m. talking to Fiscal Salazar and discussing about everything that we had to do. There's some very sensitive spots in certain political parties there, but I mean, it's something that we have to do.
And when you decided what you had to do, then there's the issue of what tactics and methodology you used to do it. Were there models from other countries that you looked at and that you took some of or took a lot of to design the program that you went forward with?
There's a few things. They all come from more or less the same school that have been evolving differently. But we took a little bit of the Singapore case, Thailand also in the late 80s and early 90s. Then Colombia, more or less in the same time, and Mexico later on. So we had to study some models, and also with the help of the international community, help with the states of Israel, we were able to work especially on the intelligence side. That was the most difficult part, because the rest, everyone can buy a gun, but to have to be organized, to be able to do counterintelligence also, because these narco-terrorist groups are heavily armed, very well organized. They operate in dozens of countries, and they have about 40,000 men and women armed, heavily armed men and women. They're the same size of our army. Our army is 40,000, they are 40,000. But we have the police, which is 60,000. And those are the real numbers. So unless we're smart, it's almost impossible to break that.
And how do you, when you're weighing out those tactics, weigh what needs to get done to accomplish what, with the very delicate and difficult balance with concerns about rule of law and human rights? How do you make that balance in your decision making?
First, we needed broad democratic support. That's why we went to the assembly and to the courts, so we could have, first support, political support. Then in the judicial branch, we had to follow very strict guidelines with the Consejo de la Judicatura, with the National Court. We need to be coordinated, and also identify the tactics that the other, that our enemy was using. Some of them owned judges, they owned district attorneys, they owned colonels and generals. So it had to be very well synchronized, and at the same time to have international observation to it, because to be honest, even assassins and kidnappers now try to use like a fake flag of human rights. I still remember watching a YouTube video of the head of the sicarios from the Lobos. The Lobos is the largest narco-terrorist organization in Ecuador that has around 14,000 soldiers. He had 42 people kidnapped inside of the Turi jail. And then he did a first video, insulting my whole family and threatening that he was going to kill all of them. But in the second video, when he saw that we were actually being strong, he appeared, very well dressed with a white shirt, talking about the Geneva Convention, that it should be respected. And he had 42 people kidnapped, and he had killed 17, and he was the head of 60 contract killers. So it sounds like a joke, but it's the truth. And some of his lawyers were part of NGOs. We're actually part from NGOs, write newsletters worldwide. And you're saying, okay, so how does this really work? But if you're an organization or multiple organizations that move $60 billion in product a year, you can own your own few NGOs. You can do a lot of crazy things that you would think that they're impossible, but they're full of cash and they're very well organized. So you can't fall into that trap. You need to, follow the right procedures, have the right observation, talk to the United Nations, to the Red Cross, to be in complete synergy with them. If not, you can fall into a trap.
I was listening last Thursday to an extended interview with your Interior Minister, Valencia, on security issues. In fact, I think it was a full hour on just security issues. And the question was, what are some of the major plans that Ecuador has to address this? You talked about some, and the idea of building super prisons or in isolated areas, et cetera, better education. But one thing she didn't say, which I wasn't surprised, was we need to really look at the whole way we regulate drugs. And as you know, the number of ex-presidents in Latin America, Santos and Cedillo and Lagos and Cardozo and others, and your neighbor, President Petro, have basically said, and others, we're never going to win this war. And it's cost us a lot in lives and treasury to do it. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think all drugs are equal.
Cannabis is legal in terms.
Yes, no, to grow cannabis in Ecuador, cannabis and hemp is legal in Ecuador as well for medicinal purposes. But in my experience, drugs are getting stronger per gram. So even if you deregulate that completely, it's gonna cost probably a couple of full generations till it stabilizes. And then, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to let hundreds of thousands of kids kill themselves in a couple of years? I mean, I have a hard time deciding that on my own. I could tell you the case of Ecuador, and same problem you have here with fentanyl. And another big problem we have in Ecuador in schools, it's because to carry small amounts of drugs was depenalized. What happened is that a whole new network of drug distribution, of micro trafficking, started happening in schools, elementary schools in Ecuador, especially with H. H is what crack is to cocaine, H is to heroin. And with just a few grams, with something smaller than your fingernail, you can have an extremely strong high. And after maximum 3 times of consumption, you're already hooked. And it has the same numbers as heroin. Less than 20% ever get out of it. The rest die. So I saw during the campaign and during my visits and all over the country, 6, 7, 8-year-olds with their brain fried because of the consumption of H. In elementary schools, kids just a little bit older than my daughter. How can you regulate that? Or if you deregulate, drugs, how are you going to avoid that? I don't have the perfect answer to it. I just know that the numbers, especially on the increase of intensity per gram on today's drugs, is making it very hard to legalize all drugs. I said there, cannabis may be one thing. H is definitely another world. I've seen 7 and 8-year-olds chained to furniture because their parents don't know what else to do with them. And I don't think that legalizing heroin or H will help.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit. There's been calls for Europe and in North America, but elsewhere, to have Latin America as a whole insert itself more into the international political sphere. right? There were trips by the head of the EU, Chancellor of Germany, to try and, for example, drum up support for the Ukraine, the battle against Ukraine. We have that, what's going on in the Middle East right now. There are many people in Latin America, or some that say Latin America just needs to stay actively neutral in all of that and not insert itself into those. Your thoughts about that?
Depends on what neutrality is for you. Personally, I've communicated with Zelensky and Putin saying that we could be a vehicle for peace and that we were willing to actively work on finding a solution. Same thing in Israel and Gaza and the Palestinian Authority. In our case, we can't actively engage in another war if we have a war internally. Like I said, we're more than willing and able to actively work on peace. I actually said it in front of the Senate in Moscow, saying that I was against the war. At that time, they were only saying military operation. I mean, that's a position, to be against the war. But at the same time, we're fighting our own war. And we need to be conscious about that. Another way of seeing things is also the amount of violent death that we have and destruction that we have in Ecuador. And we've received 1/200th of the aid that the Ukraine has in the last 4 months. So 1/200. And that's the total aid of all nations. What about that? We're strategically placed. The country moves over 1,500 tons of cocaine every year. We had over 8,000 violent deaths last year, over 80,000 rapes. More than 60,000 children were raped, kidnapped, and trafficked. And still, I haven't heard anyone pronounce themselves about what's going on in a nation that is suffering as well.
I'm conscious of the time. I'll ask one more question. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience, but we are running a bit behind. But let me ask one more, if I might. You're going up to Ottawa tomorrow to have a meeting with the Prime Minister. Amongst the friends in this room, would you like to share what kind of messages you want to deliver, you will deliver to him, and what you hope are the messages that he delivers to you?
We want to work closely with Canada. We want to work on a free trade agreement. We have compatible economies, and we could help each other a lot as nations. I think that Canada can also be a strategic partner in terms of tourism, in terms of energy, in terms of agriculture. And I think that that we should move quickly, and that we should have a few talks, but not let it just sit there eternally and have infinite dialogues on something that's never concrete. I think it's time for action. I think it's time to make decisions. Some are tough, some are actually pretty easy. You just need the will to do so. So that's going to be my message.
And you hope he says yes.
I hope so. I hope so. I really hope so.
Great. I don't see any cards. Maybe we should close. Are there any time? Maybe take one. I don't see one. we can draw it to a close, this part of the session. There will be a signing ceremony. If people could just wait, we'll change on the stage, bring the table up for the signing. But please join me in thanking President Noboa for his time with us.